Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the Dan John podcast from danjohnuniversity.com. This is episode number 70, and isn't that exciting? Okay, we have a question from Doug. Doug says, throughout most of my 20s and 30s, my training was almost exclusively geared towards strength and hypertrophy, which is great. However, since turning 40 a couple of years ago and getting back to martial arts, I've expanded my training to focus more on improving athleticism while at the same time trying to train smarter to remain physically capable and pain-free for as long as possible. It kind of flipped it a little bit, which is fine. To that end, I now incorporate more flexibility, mobility, cardio, mainly through martial arts, which is great, and body control, original strength resets, stability ball, things like that, into my training. While I'd love to spend lots of time on each, I find it quickly becomes death by 1,000 cuts. That's a really good point. So I typically only spend 5 to 10 minutes a day on flexibility, mobility, and body control. Strength training is still just as important, but now I spend 3 times a week and focus mainly on compound lifts at varying rep ranges. Before I even answer your question, I like this idea. I like your heading here. The only thing I would say is, why don't you do what we do over at Dan John University? Between every set of strength work or hypertrophy work, or even Olympic lifting in my case, I do an original strength reset. So if I do military presses, I hop on the ground and I do prone neck nods or something like that, or find my shoes. If I'm doing overhead squats, I jump on the ground and I get in the 6-point rock position, slide my arms out, and I do those long stretches. It's in my video on learning how to overhead squat. Let's get to your question. So with athletic performance and longevity in mind, which fitness attributes do you feel are the most important to train regularly? And if possible, your go-to exercises for each, we greatly appreciate it. Athletic performance and longevity in mind, boy, we're almost to an easy strength thing. Let's go push, pull, hinge, squat, loaded carry real quick. I would say the military or the kettlebell overhead presses. Most men, Doug, have shoulder issues, and if you're going to keep doing the martial arts, you're going to get shoulder issues just from the wear and tear of the game. So military overhead presses, I like military and double kettlebell presses and single hand kettlebell presses. Hanging for the pull, just simply the bar hang, and then later, of course, the flexed arm hang. You can do it this way, you can do it parallel, or you can do it pull up. Obviously, I start every day myself with the TRX suspension trainers, TYI, single arm row, as just my general warm up because all those years of throwing, I'm trying to rebalance myself backwards. When it comes to the squat, Doug, just the movement of the squat is what you need. I would just stick to the goblet squat. I could say a lot more, but let's just stick to the goblet squat. Well, when it comes to the hinge, it so much depends on what you want to do ballistically. But I'm not a huge fan of the trap bar deadlift. I don't consider it the answer to all questions. But for general trainers, it's in a real nice position, or trap bar deadlifts or rack deadlifts. I also like the deficit deadlift. I have Brett Contreras' little device, and though you can do it with kettlebells on a box. And then, of course, I got to tell you, loaded carries, as if you're going to be a fighter, you'd want to do more bear hugging to build up that anaconda strength. But I tell you, the farmer walk, because of what it does for grip strength, is marvelous. And of course, according to Stu McGill and what I've done, the suitcase carry might be the answer to all questions when it comes to the exercises as we need. We have a little workout called the Sparrow Hawk or the Spar Hawk, and it's 8 goblet squats, a suitcase carry, 7 goblet squats, the opposite hand, okay, suitcase carry, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Nice, quick little workout. You get your loaded carries in, but the thing is, you have to hold tension here the entire time you're doing the workout, and I think you might like it. Doug, these are good questions. Just honestly, the best thing you can do now is make sure you have appropriate hypertrophy work, appropriate strength work, appropriate mobility, and appropriate flexibility. And it seems like you're doing the basics here. Mixing original strength with your strength work might be the answer. Thank you. We have a question from Chris. Do you think kettlebell and body weight training is enough for my 13-year-old daughter that wants to be a competitive high school and maybe beyond athlete to realize her athletic potential in these sports? You didn't mention which sports, at least I don't have it, or do you recommend we work in Olympic lifts as well? This would require that I get the equipment, make space at home, and get her the coaching needed to learn them properly. But I am willing to do that if you are strong, yes. Is the added complexity going to be worth it over focusing on the swings, snatches, kettlebell presses, pull-ups, etc.? Well, she's 13, so I'd love to see her do the barbell deadlift, learn the back squat, the front squat, and the basics of weightlifting. But, especially now in these times of, dealing with COVID, and especially the economic aftershock of it, I certainly understand and appreciate your issues here. Do you have to do the Olympic lifts? No. You can have a great career without doing the Olympic lifts. Of course, I'm a huge fan of them because, what it did for me. But sure, just getting her stronger, having her do the basics is going to be just fine. And 13 is a very good time for an adolescent, male or female, to start training. So, Chris, I think you'll do fine. If she wants to be a thrower or something, she's going to probably have to learn the O lifts. But a good foundation of hinge and squat is really probably more important than learning the actual lifts. I hope that helped. We have a question from Luis. I just got rid of COVID-19. Good for you. I'm happy to hear that. Before it, I used to have a pretty decent conditioning. I used to lift 5 to 6 days a week and used to train grappling 5 days a week. But I just tried to exercise a bit for the first time after COVID. I was out for just 2 weeks. And after a push-ups workout, around 350 push-ups in total, I've been extremely sore for days. Luis, no matter what you do, skipping 2 weeks and then jumping into 350 is going to make you sore. But I digress. And the aerobics workout I normally do with ease right now leaves me without breath after just a couple of minutes. My question is, what do you think is the best way to go back on track? Well, I was just with my nephew, and he got a good case of COVID himself. And it's, I would say, months later, and he's still struggling. It seems that COVID seems to kind of pick and choose who gets hit hard or easy. I just got to tell you, Luis, this is going to be something I have to talk to your doctor. I know this with my nephew. He's struggling. He's still struggling months later. We had a really interesting discussion about blood types. I'm an O, and I guess the O blood type doesn't get as hard as other blood types. And there's actually they were going through this little list. I don't remember which one was the worst, but maybe B positive or something like that. It doesn't matter. But it just seems to be a lot more random. I would think of it more, instead of like you had the flu for 2 weeks, think more like you had pneumonia for 2 weeks. That might actually help you. And realize that if you thought you could come back in a week, mentally think, okay, it's the Star Trek Wrath of Khan thing. If typically it would take hours, think days. Typically, if it would take days, think weeks. I would give yourself a lot more time. The fact that you're trying to get out there and do it, is very honorable. I don't want to give you any medical advice, but I would give yourself a break. Okay, don't be hard on yourself. Get back in as you can. Maybe think, hey, you know what? In the summer of 2021, I'll be back. And even then, just really give yourself some time, to let this come around. A lot more time than you think. I discovered especially with some of my more major surgeries, when I gave myself a break emotionally, I tended to recover and heal much faster when I wasn't trying to, constantly, poke the bear. You ready to go? You ready to go? I hope that helps. We have a question from Jack. I've been curious about how you would combine the standard easy strength with the Olympic lifting variation for a trainee with interest in progressing both. For reference, I'm currently at all your men's strength standards besides the body weight snatch. which is an important one, I think. Would you advise 2 to 4 weeks with the standard version of easy strength and then 2 to 4 weeks cycling on easy strength for weightlifting? That's not bad. I mean, you answered your own question. That's pretty good. Or do you think that just doing the Olympic lifts on the third transition week would be sufficient? My goals all revolve around doing long-term injury-free progress at all 5 major lifts. Jack, here's the interesting thing. On the website, danjohnuniversity.com, we have the easy strength for Olympic lifting. And I got to tell you, when I just Olympic lifted, I had the best deadlift on the Utah State powerlifting team. I had a great back squat without ever back squatting. The Olympic lifts will take care of most of the other things. I actually would rather see you do about 2 months of the easy strength Olympic lifting and then cycle in the other stuff, and really maybe just 2 to 3, I was going to say 2 to 3 to 4 weeks. And maybe 2 would be short enough, because one thing you'll find when you're putting weights overhead, your bench press, your squat, and your deadlift all stay pretty good. I like your idea of 1 month on easy strength for Olympic lifting, 1 month standard easy strength. I think that's very good. Though with your snatch not being up to where we want it to be, I'd much rather see you focus on that first. And once you take care of that, you'll see some real good things happening down the line. Thank you, Jack. Good question. We have a question from Chris. I've recently started training with kettlebells, and I told my parents how good it's made me feel. Now, my mom is interested in trying to do some kettlebell training. For reference, she's 70 years old and relatively sedentary, though she does do some walking. Good. First, Chris, I want you to make sure that when you come over to visit, one of the things you both do is pop up and go for a walk. I think you guys sitting around walking is far more important than you guys watching, I don't know, reruns, or maybe certainly watch The Mandalorian, but get that walking in. If she has any lifting experience, it was long in the past. She got a total knee replacement a couple of years ago. What kind of program would you suggest for someone in her position? I don't think it needs to revolve around kettlebells, but should at least include them. Chris, with your mom having relatively no weightlifting background, generally I would say I think it'd be great if you got her into a gym setting and had her do machines for about, 4 to 6 weeks, maybe even longer, because general hypertrophy is something we want her to work on at first. That's 3 sets of 8 of the leg extension, leg curl, the pushes, the pulls, the machines, okay? But with COVID and some of the issues now, that option might not be doable. But certainly, if you can, appropriate goblet squatting, appropriate deadlifting, and an appropriate press. That's probably all she's going to need. Walk. Maybe have her, try squatting to a chair with no weight, and just see how that works for her. And then if you do decide to do deadlifts, put the weight in a box. So really, you're going to be using boxes for 2 things: raising the weight up to her for the hinge, and raising, allowing a platform for her butt to get to on the squat. Boy, if you can get her to squat and deadlift, it'll be money with that walking program in there too. Thank you, Chris, and thanks for taking an interest in your folks. That's really good. Thank you. I hope I say this name right. We have a question from Harsh Vardhan. I asked this question for my mom. She is 61 years old. She has knee issues. It's kind of interesting how this people helping their parents is coming up again and again. A few months ago, I got her to squat on her bed so that this would be a partial squat with vertical shins. She has greatly benefited in terms of strength and stamina. She is able to handle the household chores without getting tired. Well, that's great. That's a nice little start to a program. She feels that she has regained the thickness in her thighs, which were wasting away. My question is related to her inability to go into a deep squat. I tried to make her do the doorknob squat, but even that is painful for her knees. Well, because she has knee issues, so maybe we don't do that. How can I make her go through the full range of motion and then maybe progress to a point where she's able to do body weight squats or goblet squats. You might not be able to. I wish you would have had some, I want you to get some medical advice on this, but there's probably an optimal range of motion for her to do the squat in. If I mean, I'm no expert, but if it's something as simple as arthritis, we can support the system through some partial work and make her feel better. But if it's something, something that involves an surgical intervention, you want to make sure you get a picture on that, okay? I think you're doing the right thing. I'd love it if you would add walking to the program, but let's just keep finding exercises she can do without pain. And that's the hardest part of being a coach or a trainer, is working with the limitations that you have. And I like to think that I'm very good at that. I like to solve problems. So I hope that helps, but please don't put your mother into more pain. Thank you. We have a question from Chris. Chris says, I really enjoy the Kettlebell Home User's Guide workshop on the site. Thank you. It doesn't look it, but I spend a lot of time putting that together. It got me stoked to use the workout generator more, and especially has expanded my view of the hip hinge. That said, I have some questions. It is my understanding that the Bulgarian goat bag swing is a worthy grinding regression of the ballistic swing. Well, yeah, it can be a regression, or it can be a progression from something as simple as like the rack deadlift or something. And that most of the benefits are still achieved teaching tension in the plank, patterning the hinge. The hip thrust is another regression of the swing, or an independent exercise again, and one I have seen programmed in your recent videos, hip thrust and clamshells, easy strength for fat loss, etc. So, question 1. When would you program the hip thrust over the goat bag? I would keep both of them in the program. It's a rare day I don't do hip thrusts. I travel with a Brett Contreras glute loop, and I do hip thrusts constantly on the road. Try not to get yourself into an either-or question on these. One of the nice things about the hip thrust is you have to get up and down off the ground when you do them. With the goat bag, what's great about that is you're getting more of the butt back than you would in the hip thrust. Both are very good at the top position. The hip thrust is better at the top position. The goat bag is better in the hinge. So this is one of those times where I'd really try to keep both in a weekly progression, and maybe both daily, with just use one in the warm-ups and use one in the workout. Question number 2, is the Bulgarian goat bag an exercise I should expect to be progressive in load? Well, one of the problems is that you have to hold the load here and move with it. So it's not very, you're not, when you do back squats or good mornings, you got the weight here, and you can, but here you're going to come down to how much you can curl, hold, and push. I've never done them. I don't think I've ever done them more with the 32K. I mean, I could lie to you and say I have, but I don't think so. But what I like about it is you get those reps up in it. It's a good exercise to get the reps higher. And of course, I always mix it with goblet squats. And question 3. Any thoughts on performing a Bulgarian goat bag, the hinge, from the hip thrust position? Oh, so adding load? Yeah, now you're right into Brett Contreras' work on the hip thrust. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not a fan of putting weights on my body there, and so when I do hip thrust on the hip thrust machine, I use Brett's. I only use rubber bands, those big resistance bands. I just don't like load on that part of my body. I'm just not a fan of it. I see people do it online constantly, and oh yeah, that makes sense. But personally, I don't like doing it. Most people I work with don't like doing it. It might just be something when you hit a certain age, you don't like load on certain areas of your body. Good questions. Thanks for asking. We have a question from Davis. How would you recommend progression for the single kettlebell overhead squat? Well, first off, I wouldn't. I'm not a fan of doing squats with kettlebells overhead. I just worry about the stability. I know people do them. I go to certs, and many of my assistants will be doing the circus tricks. And I'm always like, yeah, I get it, but I don't know if it's an exercise I like. My knee-jerk reaction is to follow what you've written about the barbell overhead squat. Right. And your knee-jerk is the correct answer in this case. I like the barbell overhead squat. If I could say, it's my first published article was on that, and it'd be my go-to if I only could do one exercise in a workout. But I also get the feeling that the risk to reward ratio for going heavy on the kettlebell overhead squat is similar to the heavy Turkish get-up. Now you're thinking the way I think about things. Is there a sweet spot for treating the kettlebell overhead squat as both the strength movement and mobility movement? Well, the problem is when you have the single bell overhead, are you really doing mobility work, or are you just finding ways to cheat the exercise? I've seen people, my assistants at certs, they're doing the exercise, and all of a sudden you look over, and they've made so many compromises physically. I worry about them, blowing a gasket. So yeah, Davis, it's a good question. Actually, my favorite part of your question, if you don't mind, was your secondary thoughts, where you asked me a question and then you dialogued with yourself. That's the secret of getting ahead in practically everything in life. And just remember that, Davis, in the future. You had a little give and take in your questions by yourself, and then you gave me a chance to reflect on both sides of it. And I think that's the ticket to education. So thank you very much. We have a question from Daniel. It's a good question, and it's a great name. What type of warm-up would you recommend before and during a powerlifting meet competition? And how to stay focused and engaged between your attempts, both body and mind? Well, okay, so Daniel, I'm a big believer that warm-ups are important. In fact, Mike and Minnie Pakowski quoted me. I call that rule number 8. It doesn't matter. I don't want to hear your excuses. Pete George, the great Olympic lifter, only took 135 pounds, 60 kilos. That's all he did. And then he'd go to the platform and start with, 120, 130 kilos, 60 to 120. I mean, big jumps. I've been to meets where people have 10 or 13 lifts planned. I just think that's way too many. Some of the best performances in my life were something bad happened, and I didn't get a chance to get my perfect warm-up in. But when it was time to compete, I nailed it. So I would say you might want to talk to somebody smarter than me, and that person would be Marty Gallagher. One thing Marty does is he constantly focuses in the build-up with perfect reps, in every rep on the way to that 12-week cycle upwards. I think if you take care of business beforehand, the 12 weeks, a 16-week peak, you don't have to worry about the warm-ups as much. And how do I stay focused and properly engaged? Now, I'm an Olympic lifter, not a power lifter, so our arousal levels are different. But the best thing I've ever done is I think the book is called Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess. And he has these one-page problems. And the question is, do you have enough pieces to checkmate? And then you look, and then you turn the page, and you say yes or no. And then he shows you. And I found that to be perfect because it pulls my brain away from the competition. I can be sitting in the stands, completely engaged in a chess problem. Now you say, well, why? Well, don't forget, I'm relying on the weeks, the months, the years of preparation. And mostly my monkey brain gets in the way at this time. So that's how I do it. Daniel, powerlifting isn't my area of expertise. I would say mostly, and the other thing you have to really prepare for, at my powerlifting meet, I weighed in at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning and deadlifted at 3 a.m. on Sunday morning. There is no way to prepare for that, except for sitting around for almost 24 hours in your gym lifting. So I like to be prepared for everything and let nothing bother me, nothing. And I do that by having, well, first off, you take care of business when you need to take care of business. You join you join the organization, you send your check in the mail. You get a checklist for all your equipment, all your ideas. Write everything down. 2-3 days ahead of the competition, you pull everything out and you double check your checklist. For me, I think preparation is always far more important than what the exact warm-up is. I hope that helps. We have a question from Stephanie. I know the Olympic lifts benefit athletes, but would you say they have benefits for the general population, ages 25 to 55? Okay, first off, yes. If you're willing to go through the process of learning tension, arousal, hinge, squat, have the appropriate equipment, and take your time to do it. That might take a while. Most people don't want to take a while. I'm a trainer, 27 years old, in Massachusetts, and mostly work with kettlebells and only use my barbell for front squats and deadlifts. Would you recommend I learn the lifts and teach them to my clients when I know them well enough? And if so, would you recommend a program for me? Well, I got to tell you, Stephanie, the best program I know is at danjohnuniversity.com. Wow, I'm selling my own product. But really, it's the easy strength for Olympic lifting. We also have a beginner program that Brian put together. I think it's really good. Even if you don't learn the Olympic lifts from it, just do the videos where you practice the hinge, where you practice the overhead squat with the goblet squat. Even if you just did that, you would get the bulk of the tools that you'll need to the benefits of the Olympic lifts. Do you need to learn them? Well, I mean, if you have the time, interest, and energy, and if you're willing to spend 6 months to a year learning them, well, and maybe even compete in a single meet or two, and everything I teach about arousal will make more sense then, yes. But if you just want the basic tools, go to the website and do the beginner's weightlifting program. I think you'll be very happy with what you learn from that. Thank you, Stephanie. We have a question from Simon, and Simon says, in podcast episode 69, you mentioned that previously published materials sometimes don't get updated, even though your thoughts on it have changed. Well, yeah, Simon, I mean, that's what we all do. I look back in how I first taught, modern America, or the Middle Ages, or Beowulf, or The Sword and the Stone, or Genesis. And I look at the way I did things then, and fortunately, because when you're lecturing, it's easier to add material. I look at those lectures and I'm like, yeah, not only did I do this differently now, here's where I made the changes. But when it comes to a published article, I don't know if I do, hang on, I do update sometimes. If you go to T-Nation, you'll see I've updated the Tabata article. I've updated the 10,000 Swing Challenge. But for the bulk of the articles, I mean, no offense, but no one cares. I sometimes get this thing on the internet, TLDR, too long, didn't read, because my articles are longer than the average person's bowel movements. So what do I know? My question is based on the strength standards. Regressions are the best corrections. List from Sleepless in Seattle. It's an article I wrote while I was in Seattle. And I included some material from Paul Lysingo, some good friends. And he asked, are there any revisions to the list you would make if writing them today? The thing that was so great about it was my friend Stoney had put together that thing, that spreadsheet where we got a chance to graph in push, pull, hinge, squat. And the thing was, you wanted to be a diamond. And a guy like me, I can overhead squat my body weight for 15. But I can only do 2 pull-ups, so we call that a flat tire. That's where, instead of being a perfect diamond, you have this obvious gap. And Simon, the key is this. When it comes to standards, and this is the key, and everyone misses it, it's the one you're not up to is the issue. Talking to someone the other day about this basic standard I've had it's been a while, but you should be able to clean and press and snatch your body weight. Okay. Well, this whole conversation came up about all these issues the guy had. And it was like, well, about the lift he couldn't make. And it was those issues that he needed to address. I'm not mobile enough to snatch. I'm not flexible enough to snatch. My X, my Y, and Z don't allow me to snatch. I can't. Well, getting your bench press up to 10,000 pounds and having those huge physical issues, to me, that's what we call gaps. There's two things I always coach. One is, are you up to standard? And then number two, what are your gaps? I literally make a living, Simon, getting people to look at their gaps and say, this is what I need to do. So the standards give you an idea, and that's great that you can deadlift, triple body weight, good. But if you can't do a single pull-up, there's your issue. I hope that helps. No, I wouldn't change a single one. Well, thanks again, everybody. Each week I try to answer as many questions as I can. And remember, if you want me to answer questions, send them to podcast@danjohnuniversity.com. Thank you so much.